It is difficult for me to recover myself from the effect of the prayer. Prayer has been abide with me. And I have wondered how far human beings have not taken advantage of this constant abiding of an omnipresent reality. Yes, the aspiration is there. It is sincere and it is always responded to in the measure of its sincerity. And if it has not succeeded to the measure that we want, it is a human failing and a reservation on the part of human being that perhaps the constant abiding of that presence might so change this aspect of individual and collective life that perhaps life will cease to be what it now is, and it might become something so different that it would justify the prayer of that great poet in English literature, who said in his great poem, The Hound of Heaven, I knew the love of him who was pursuing me, but I was loth at heart, lest having him I may have none besides. This is the difficulty of human nature. It is constantly there and abiding. Do we know that it is abiding? Do we want to know that it is abiding? And are we prepared to take the consequences of a constant abiding of an omnipotent reality, which is the cause of the cosmos, which is the root of life, which is the root of everything that man can conceive and attain? It is our central difficulty. And the constant witnesses of that omnipresent reality have always brought back to us that it is abiding, it abides. Not only it abides, it is waiting impatiently that man can be ready to receive it, to mold its life, individual and collective, in the mold of a divine image, which your last prayer wished humanity to accept. It is there. It wants to come. It is pressing. Question is not whether it is there. Question is whether man is ready, whether we are ready as an individual or as a community. He said, Thy kingdom come on earth. How? Are we ready for that kingdom? Do we want to bring it in our individual life? Do we want to bring it in our collective life? Well, to that, there is an answer. I have been asked to speak on the life of this great light that bears again witness not only to its constant abiding, but to its constant solicitude for mankind, for its constant anxiety to come down and perfect man. It is a biography that I am supposed to speak about. Life in any case is mystery. And some births that happen in life are not only mysterious but carry within them a divine mystery. And you will see that when we speak about a biography, we do not want to bring up, generally we think about incidents of life and what work and what action was done. The essence of biography of anybody is not what he does, but from what he proceeds to do. From where does the action arise? Externally, perhaps the action is very small, but that can mold human history. Life and biography, when we undertake to understand it and study it, we'll find that it does not consist in incidents of life, not in actions externally done, but the root, the origin from which the action proceeds. And Some students of history actually tell us that history of the whole human race can be the biography of a few great persons. And I think there is a great truth in that belief. Because the human life has been molded not so much by political constitutions, though they have played their part, but by those who have brought to the human mind and human heart a conception, a perception, a possibility of realization of what man is in his deepest essence. It is they who have really molded the history of humanity. Perhaps in history book, their names may not figure. A Jesus Christ, how he lived, what he did, where he was, what he ate, what were the people whom he met, what was the area that he covered during his life. If you study, you will find it surprisingly small, perhaps insignificant, compared with some work which some great people today are doing. Take the life of Lord Gautam Buddha. He hardly covered for 45 years of his mission, even 400 square miles of Indian territory. And yet, the action which proceeded from his consciousness, but not individual actions in the narrow personal egoistic sense of the term, but they brought forth into actuality a reality which made itself felt afterwards and molded the course of history of several nations. It is one of that kind of biography that I am going to speak before you. It is not the outer action that matters, but the inner consciousness from which the action arises. That is the essence of biography. Not what one does, what one works, what one attains, but what one is. It is from what one is, what he has become, that actions come out. A great action, if it is egoistic and vainful, is small compared to a very small action done sincerely, in obedience to the impulse to surrender oneself to the divine. You may be only sweeping the floor of a church or a small room in your house with the divine attitude of surrender in your mind. And you might be running a big war. The war is small spiritually. Your small action is great spiritually. This is what we have to understand when we try to approach biography of great persons who are intended by some higher force to change the course of human history. Here I am just going to tell you about the human history of somebody whom people called Sri Aurobindo. He was born in India in the last century, 1872, August 15th, a day which is very celebrated in the history of mankind, because I think it happens to be the day of Napoleon's birth also, but this is a Napoleon in another field. And he was born in a very aristocratic family. His father happened to be a medical man. He was trained in England, and he was completely anglicized, as many Indians in the last generations were. Dr. Krishnadhan Ghosh, his father, wanted to bring all his children up as perfect Englishmen. With that desire, he engaged an English governess in the house when Sri Aurobindo was born, so that he may not know anything about India, not even learn Indian language. That was the attitude of his father. And he took his sons, after 7 years of training, to England directly. Even from 5th to the 7th year, he was kept in an Anglo-Indian school meant only for European officers working in India for British government, well, British Empire of those days. 2 years training in the British school there, and on the 7th year he was taken to England with 2 of his brothers and put in Manchester in 1879. From 1879 to 1884, he remained in Manchester with a priest, Mr. Druitt. He was a Presbyterian minister, and in his house remained privately without going to any school, but they taught, Mr. and Mrs. Druitt taught him the 3 R's, mathematics and languages and Latin and Greek and so on. From 1884, he was taken to London to enter St. Paul's School, the famous school where Dr. Walker was then the high master, as they say. He is not the headmaster, but the high master. He was formerly, I think, he wanted to become a priest, but changed his vocation and became, well, a teacher. He liked to be a teacher. And this high master Walker took to Sri Aurobindo very kindly, found him very clever, and so pushed him up quickly in upper classes, and he proved equal to the estimation of his teacher by passing examination with great credit. He took prizes in history, in literature, and was qualified at the end of his career in 1890 to go to King's College as a scholar of Greek and Latin. He secured record marks and therefore was given government scholarship by English government and went to Cambridge from 1890 to 1892. He was in England. King's College with the scholarship of the government and also preparing himself for the ICS examination, which was at that time regarded as the greatest, ambition to be attained by any Indian because he would be in the covenanted service of the British government. His father wanted him to become a great officer and contribute something to the good government of India under British rule. That was the desire of his father. Joining Cambridge, he awoke to the necessity of national freedom there because there were Indian students who organized a small group called the Majlis, Indian Association of Students, and they organized themselves for freedom. And Sri Aurobindo joined this movement and found that that was the movement which was worth his support. So he didn't want to become a cog in the wheel of British imperialism in India, and he absented himself from the writing test, a practical test for the ICS collectors and commissioners of those days. And, well, even though he passed with very great credit in his written examination, he was not selected because he didn't go for the practical test of writing. He evaded the British service that way, and it was a disappointment to his father that he couldn't get the covenanted service. Came back to India in 1893 and joined the Baroda state as a professor of French and English. And he remained there for about 12 years till the national movement called him. In fact, every vacation when he was professor and vice principal of the College of Baroda State, he went to Bengal, his native province, and prepared young men for the revolutionary movement, trying to inculcate in them the spirit of freedom. He believed in individual and collective freedom. He encouraged the students to remove the idea of enslavement, political enslavement under which India was, and encourage them to form organizations to make a dynamic effort for securing the freedom of the country. After having prepared the background in 1905, he resigned his post and joined openly the political movement and became one of the greatest leaders of Indian political movement of those days. He and Bal Gangadhar Tilak were the only two leaders in that part of Indian struggle to give to India the political national philosophy. Before that, it was moderatism, praying to the government, and now after their leadership, it became a national philosophy of politics based upon sacrifice, organization, and service to the people. That was the program which they brought to the front. He worked in Indian politics in 1907. He was charged with Alipur bomb case, Vande Mataram sedition case. Every time he was acquitted of the charges against him, but the government saw that he was the one who was the brain of the national movement of India at that time. And 3 times he was charged and 3 times he was acquitted. During his jail life and during the last part of his life in Baroda, he came across, when he came back to India as an anglicized Indian, he went back to Indian culture and tried to study Indian languages. He studied Sanskrit, he studied Gujarati, Marathi, Bengali, all the Indian languages, and in Sanskrit language he came across the yogic literature which attracted his attention. He was not a religious man in the orthodox sense of the term, but this life attracted him. That yoga promised something which was practical, which was something one could experience. One could turn all his attention and willpower towards the goal which yoga was putting down. And he thought that was a realm that was worth his trial. So he began practicing yoga on his own in Baroda. But the political life, the need for Indian freedom, so attracted him that his yogic practice was interrupted. But when he was in jail, 1 year under trial, he again resumed the practice of yoga and had a very great epoch making experience, which turned the course of his life from open politics to spiritual life and to the vision of fulfillment of man on earth. That was an epoch making experience during jail life in 1907 and 8. From 1910, when he came out from the jail, he withdrew himself from politics in the light of the experience that had come to him and went to Pondicherry, first to Chandranagar and then to Pondicherry, French possessions of those days, in order to pursue without disturbance the practice of yoga, which had led him to very concrete results and the consequences of which, the corollary of which he wanted to work out in his own life before he thought it proper to give it out to mankind. With that objective, he retired to Pondicherry in 1910, April 4th. From that time, 1910 to 1950, 40 long years, he remained in Pondicherry, working out at this problem, working out the consequences of the realization that had come to him. And in 1950, in 1909, he got this experience in jail life. In 1914, an incident happened which also enlarged the scope of his mission. A French lady, Madame Alfassa, came from Paris, seeking the same truths which Sri Aurobindo had been pursuing. She wanted to bring down the presence of the divine in life, and she wanted to change the human life into, if possible, life divine. And she had a intuitive knowledge that India was the country where perhaps she might find the light. With that, she came back to India from Paris, from France. And when she came to India, being French, she came to Pondicherry. It so happened that at that time, Sri Aurobindo was in Pondicherry. And somebody drew her attention to a yogi who had been a great all India national leader and who also was practicing yoga and was known as a great yogi. So she saw him just before going to Benares or Tibet or some other part of North India where she thought she might chance upon the great teacher whom she was expecting to meet. In fact, when she saw him, she recognized that that was the light for which she was seeking. And she decided to pursue the same yoga under his guidance. But she had to go back to France because the First World War was declared August 1914. And she went back to France and came back to India only in 1920. But she came back all the same because she knew that the mission of her life would be the fulfillment of the spiritual ideal for which she stood and for which he had been working for many years. Now that gives you some rough idea of the life of Sri Aurobindo. In 1914, when mother came from Paris, she persuaded him to write something about his experiences for mankind. He was not very willing at that time, but under her pressure and under persuasion, he undertook to write for 7 long years a monthly magazine called Arya, in which he gave monthly, chapter by chapter, the great synthesis of knowledge, synthesis of thought, synthesis of the paths which men have tried to reach the divine, synthesis of Veda, Upanishad and the Gita, how in modern time the truths which they stand for can be applied to life, an ideal of unity of mankind, which he worked out in his great book, The Ideal of Human Unity, and the social factors which should weigh in the constitution of human society, he worked out in Human Cycle. He wrote 2 epics, one on Indian subject called Savitri, another on Greek subject called Ilion, which follows the line of Homer, where Homer has left his Iliad. He took up this great epic and created 5,000 lines of hexameter in English literature. I think it's an unparalleled performance in English literature in poetry. But that is beside the point. In his Arya, he worked out a synthesis of mankind, life divine, synthesis of yoga, essays on the Gita, future poetry, ideal of human unity, human cycle, Savitri, Ilion. These are his chief works. There are so many others which is not proper to recount just now. There is no time for me. Now, in this, what does he work out? If you ask. In this synthesis, what does he say? He says to this modern world, you look at this cosmos and you want to understand it. We can only use our mind and our senses in order to understand the universe. If you understand the universe, you will see that the beginning seems to be inconscience, matter, all around the whole universe which we see, not only here on earth, but the universe that extends to the interstellar space is only extension of matter, inconscience, inert, insensible. And it starts with that inconscience. You come back after 20 million years and suddenly you see that on the rock, on the bark of the tree, a green moss has formed itself. On the surface of water, the amoeba is floating. You suddenly find, yes, this is a new phenomenon. This is not inert. This is living. The green moss and the amoeba floating water, first unit of life. Life, not the same as matter. Matter is inert. Life is conscious, vitally. This life holds within itself infinite potentiality of self-reproduction, as if an infinite energy had been put into it before by some all-wise omnipotent reality, and that one seed of a tree could populate the whole earth with the species of the same tree. Tremendous infinite power of life put in the smallest available seed form. And you wait for a million years and you find out of that life creatures with sense, with eyes, with ears, with locomotion, freedom to move, capacity to know where is food, capacity to know where is fear, capacity to know where is enjoyment comes into being. Psychological factors slowly begin to come into existence when life begins to progress from the first small unit to a more and more complex organization of its own self. And when this life reaches a certain stage after some millions of years, suddenly you find that there is a mental being, man, in whom quite a different capacity has come on the top of matter, on the top of life. A mind which can question, mind which can seek, mind which wants to understand. This growth, perhaps mind was there in matter. Nothing can come out of non-existence. If matter did not hold mind incipiently involved, it could not have evolved mind, perhaps. We don't know. But this is what we see in the actual course of what has happened. In the movement of a universal energy, the secret of which is not known to the mind. Now, this mind is like a mirror that has come and it turns the mirror of consciousness around and tries to study the universe, the cosmos. What is this world in which I am? Says this matter that has evolved into mind. This matter that has become mind is now putting a question to itself and says, who am I? What is this world? Its first question is to turn round and to find out, what is this world? It sees the world and says, yes, it is matter. It is inconscience. It is inorganic. It is organic. Well, it is vegetation. It is this. It studies the whole thing. And ultimately the mirror turns upon itself and says, who am I? This very mind puts this question to itself and questions, who am I? Now, this has been the course of growth of man. Sri Aurobindo says that this is the growth of the universe and energy. It has led up to the mental consciousness. But this mental consciousness has got this inherent feeling that it is not perfect. Mind as an instrument of knowledge is keen, comprehensive as far as mind can go. But mind is not knowledge. Mind is ignorant, seeking for knowledge. And therefore, this mental consciousness is only an intermediate state. Man is a transitional being and not the full product of the process of evolution. Man has to go beyond his present formula. It is suggested by the very constitution of his mind, by the very feeling that he is ignorant, he is imperfect, he is impotent, he is incapable of all knowledge, which he feels must be his somewhere, somehow. This process of evolution that has come to mind, where man is felt as a transitional being, points the light to a further evolution. And Sri Aurobindo says that there is a higher consciousness, of which all have spoken in the past, which has been the subject preached by all founders of religion. It is that of which the idealistic philosophers have spoken. It is that of which all the mystics all over the world have been speaking. It is now here worked out for humanity in terms of rational acceptance, logic which is supported not only by individual experience of Sri Aurobindo, but by experience of all the past, by the cultural evolution of the whole human race, by activity of the human soul in every cultural field, poetry, art, philosophy, in every field there has been a breaking out from mental limitation to something more than mind. The poetical expression of the human spirit is not at its height when it is rational and intellectual. Poetry is high and true only when it goes beyond the formula of human reason and outsteps the bound of human intellectuality. The highest poetry is inspired, it is intuitive and revealed. When a poet tells the audience, "Hail to thee, blithe spirit, bird thou never wert." Shelley in his Skylark, when he says, "Hail to thee, blithe spirit, bird thou never wert," he is saying something which flouts the evidence of the senses. And still he is affirming a truth which this deepest soul of mankind has accepted for centuries and will go on accepting for always. So that our cultural activity, human cultural activity, always pointed to something more than mind all along. Sri Aurobindo says, now is the time to make an effort to go beyond mind, to the truth consciousness, to the dynamic divine consciousness, which is waiting to be realized here on earth. In fact, it is pressing. It is trying to come to mankind. And it is the privilege of man of today to see that this truth consciousness, which is the next step in the evolution of mental consciousness of man, becomes a dynamic force in its individual and collective life. The question for man is how to turn this aspiration into a dynamic movement, how to make this yearning for perfection, for a divine presence, something that will animate all actions of our life, all collective life. Shall we be able to create a new mold of collective life in which this economy-centric outlook of life which now dominates human beings drives them like cogwheels of the machine without allowing him any chance of self-fulfillment? Shall we continue this mold or shall we change it? Because unless and until a radical change is made in the constitution of man's collective life, where economy-centric outlook today dominates, it will not be possible for man to allow this dynamic divine consciousness to mold him, to mold his individual and collective life. It is necessary, therefore, that we should put this question before us seriously. I do not want to suggest solutions, but I want to suggest problems. And I want to put this question before you, that if our aspiration for a divine presence is ever to be fulfilled, it will necessitate radical thinking on new lines. Divine can come, in fact has come down. The abiding is constant and eternal presence. Are we prepared to take the advantage of eternal presence? This question we have to put to ourselves. I was trying to draw your attention to 3 or 4 experiences of Sri Aurobindo during his jail life, so as to put before you how he himself came to have these experiences and what was the nature of his experiences. 4 experiences came to him during his lifetime. One was at the height of his political career when he was in Baroda, and that experience gave him silent infinite consciousness as a great reality. I want to draw your attention to one or two great truths which are embodied in his life. That divine, if it is to be realized, must be in his entire integrality. Divine is the source of all perfection, but that perfection is infinite. And there are lines, aspects, sides of that perfection which human being can take. And if you take a one side, you might think that that is the whole of the divine. The necessity is to have an integral and complete aspect of the divine as far as our consciousness can take it now, and not to insist on a partial aspect of the Supreme and turn it into as if it was integral or the whole. Now, to him came this experience of silent, infinite consciousness, inactive, pervading all. It was in 1907 when he was at the height of his political activity, when he met a great yogi who gave him this experience and told him, throw away all thought from your mind. He did. They retired for 3 days into solitude. And he threw away his thoughts and his mind became a blank, complete silence, an infinite silence pervading everything, equally supporting good and evil, sin and virtue, matter and spirit. And he was overcome by this experience. But he had this great vision that the collective life of man also is the manifestation of the Supreme. The national spirit of different nationality is not a conglomeration of economic interests and political power. The collective life of man is the expression of the inner spirit, and that spirit is the manifestation of the cosmic spirit of the divine. And therefore, he did not want to give up the struggle for freedom for India. Even when this experience was overcoming, he again turned his attention to what were the truths behind collective life. Why is this collectivity evolved out of family, tribe, clan, societies, communities into nationhood? What is the truth behind? Is it merely a human creation? Is there not behind it a divine intention? And he saw that each collectivity had a sanction of the divine collective universal consciousness behind it. It embodied some aspect of the supreme, all pervading, omniscient reality. And therefore, there is a truth in the collective life and it's seeking for freedom. So he put this experience as a necessary part of his growth. When he was in jail, confined to solitary confinement, not allowed to meet others because revolutionaries in those days were not allowed to meet other people by British government. When he was in solitary confinement, an experience came to him. And I'll read that experience in his own words so that you may know the character of that experience. I looked at the jail that secluded me from men, and it was no longer by its high walls that I was imprisoned. No, it was the omnipresent Lord who surrounded me. I walked under the branches of the tree in front of my cell, but it was not the tree. I knew it was the omnipresent Lord, Sri Krishna, whom I saw standing there, holding over me his shade. I looked at the bars of my cell, the very grating that did duty for the door, and again I saw the omnipresent Lord. It was he who was guarding and standing sentry over me, or I lay on my coarse blanket. This was the first use of the vision that he gave me. I looked at the prisoners in the jail, the thieves, the murderers, the swindlers, and as I looked at them, I saw the presence of the Lord. It was He whom I found in these darkened souls, misused bodies. Among these thieves and dacoits, there were many who put me to shame by their sympathy, by their kindness, by their humanity, triumphant over such adverse circumstances. One I saw among them, especially, who seemed to me a saint, a peasant of the nation who did not know how to write and read, an alleged dacoit sentenced to 10 years rigorous imprisonment. When I went to the court, he says, the divine told me, look now at the magistrate. Look now at the prosecuting counsel. I looked, and it was not the magistrate whom I saw. It was the divine Lord. It was Narayana who was sitting there on the bench. I looked at the prosecuting counsel, and it was not the counsel for prosecution that I saw. It was Sri Krishna who sat there. It was my lover and friend who sat there and smiled. Now do you fear? He said, I am in all men. I overrule their actions and their words. My protection is still with you. This gives you, in his own words, some rough idea of an experience that came to him. But this experience was only the beginning. To him, the question came, if this constant presence was kept, how would human nature change? He retired to Pondicherry with this question, experimented on himself thousands of times and on others who were willing to be experimented upon, and came upon a process and found that human nature will have to change if the divine presence was to be constant. A transformation of human nature is indispensable. And with that object, he spent 18 long years after this experience. 18 years only to work out the consequences of this experience. If the divine presence, could it be kept constant? One. If it could be kept constant, what would happen to man? All psychological transformations that would be indispensable were studied. Studied not only for an individual, but for any number of samples of human individuality. And a generalization was made in Life Divine. It was made in the synthesis of yoga. It was after that that he gave out his synthesis of yoga. Well, I am now trying to give to you in summarily the result of 40 years of single-minded devotion to the mission which the divine had given him in 1908. This speech that I read from was in 1909, more than 52 years ago. And that has been working out. In obedience to this, he concentrated and sacrificed all material gains, all possibilities of career to the pursuit of this great goal of truth, to try to see the vision of mankind which the divine was showing him. Divine, in fact, led him from 1909 to the completion of this vision, to the organization of the synthesis, to the formulation of a literature, vast literature, and also, incidentally, to the creation of a small unit of people devoted to this great task, a small ashram of about 1500 people at Pondicherry. Now 1500, but when I was there, we began when we were 5. So it began with a small nucleus of people and were enlarging itself by spontaneous growth of this aspiration in different individuals who automatically came and joined this institution, and now it is about 1500 people with a school and an international educational center where 450 boys and girls are learning also in this atmosphere. They are not being taught yoga. They are not to accept the spiritual life compulsorily, but that is by way of the understanding. Now, two things I want to point out your attention to before I close. One is that here is somebody completely ignorant of India from childhood, brought up in British tradition, European tradition, who dived deep into the very center of European literature of the past, Victorian age, Greek, Latin, democracy, individual freedom, rationality, poetry, literature, social reconstruction, all the problems that modern man has got. He only dived into those. Came back ignorant of Indian culture to India, dived deep into the very center of Indian culture, and went back to the bedrock of spiritual reality, found that it is something solid and concrete, and thought that it was necessary under divine guidance to give that synthesis to mankind, to confirm the faith that religion is not a matter of affirmation or belief. Religion is experience. Turn religion into concrete experience, that is the call upon man. Well, that is what one side of him says. A synthesis of East and West. A double synthesis, if you like. Synthesis in his own self. But here is a French lady coming to India, synthesizing this very, from her very birth, what she had assimilated as a French man, French woman, coming back and assimilating the culture of India. And the two, by some sort of divine dispensation, which I have always believed in, coming together to try to give to mankind under a double integration, so to say. An integration into himself, an integration into herself, and the two coming together and working for 40 long years toward one goal: how to bring the divine light into humanity as a dynamic factor. Divine is not a static condition to be realized. Divine is the dynamic reality of the whole universe. And there is no greater dynamism than the divine. How to make that dynamism available to man? Religion has told, some of religions, I do not know how many, but some religions have told that life and God have no relation to each other. If you want to realize God, don't think of life. If you want to live life, leave God alone or reserve Him for Sunday. This is the great tragic fact of human life, where the high light has been prevented from molding human life. Where does life come from? It comes from the divine. It should be natural for life to go back to the divine. The fear is that if the divine came, life would become, we have no conception how rich and wonderful it can become. Man thinks that what he has is marvelous. It is not. Well, Sri Aurobindo, for the first time in Indian tradition at any rate, showed emphatically and rationally that life is the field for expression of the divine. Any field of life is open. Allow the human being to contact the divine consciousness. You are in an office and you say, what can I do in office? You can turn your office into a divine workshop. I am a teacher. You can. You are a nurse. You can. Do you want? Is the question. No field of life is outside the operation of the omnipresent divine reality. Turn that field in which you are to seek Him, and you will find He will be there. This is a great truth which He has given. And you will see that the field of life will be transformed if you allow the divine light to come and guide you. Well, that is one great truth which He has given to mankind today. He has pleaded for unity of mankind, which He has worked out in a long series of 38 chapters. I do not want to dwell upon it, but I want to draw your attention to these three things. He stood throughout for freedom of man, unity of mankind, and the essential divinity of the human being, as an individual and as a race. All his efforts were directed to that great purpose. And people have a misconception about an ashram here on this side of the world. Ashram is not a place where, well, people renounce and go. Ashram is not a monastery. Ashram is the place where people go to follow somebody who has embodied a great truth in his life. They want to embody the same truth in their life and mold their life, a new view of life and a new way of life. That is what the ashram is meant for, to give to men a new way and new view of life. Well, ashram is not therefore a monastery. It's not world-renouncing people who go to the ashram. It is people who seek a new view and a new way of life that go to this kind of ashram. Ashram like Mahatma Gandhi's or Sri Aurobindo's ashram are ashram that accept life. In fact, Sri Aurobindo insisted that life is the field for the divine, because life comes from the divine, and divine must be made to come into life by human aspiration, by willingness of man. He will never come by compulsion. That is a sign of omnipotence. Somebody was telling me in Stanford University that, oh, if God is omnipotent, I said, yes, but He's not a dictator. He is not one who exercises arbitrary authority. He is sure of His omnipotence and therefore can leave you free to deny Him, to refuse Him, to abuse Him. It doesn't matter to Him because He is sure of His omnipotence. He insisted that this fulfillment of man must be integral. Integral in the sense that not only by mind, not only by emotional being, not only by willpower, not only by the nervous system and the body, but by all the instruments that are given to man, he must try to feel and contact the divine. And the divine must be total and integral. Divine individual, divine cosmic, divine transcendent. The transcendent governing the cosmic and the individual. All along the transcendent supplying the energy, the power, the knowledge, the harmony, the beauty, everything that is required for perfection, divine perfection of collectivity, the divine perfection of the individual is given by the transcendent divine. One and the same. It is identical. One and the same divine, not at all different, not an equation, but an identity. One who stands in the center of the individual, it is he that stands in the center of the collectivity. It is he that is beyond the collectivity, one and the same. And he defined religion. If a religion is not universal, it cannot be eternal. A narrow religion, a sectarian religion, an exclusive religion, I am quoting his words of 99, can live only for a limited time and a limited purpose. But this religion which he has given, of which I had very little smattering before you, it is that religion, he says. But this religion can triumph over materialism by including and anticipating the discoveries of science and the speculations of philosophy. It is the one religion which impresses on mankind the closeness of God to us and embraces in its compass all possible means by which man can approach God. It is the one religion which insists every moment on the truth which all religions acknowledge, that he is in all men, in all things, that in him we move and have our being. It is the one religion which enables us not only to understand and believe this truth, but to realize it with every part of our being. It is the one religion which shows the world that the world is, that it is the play of the supreme omnipresent reality. It is the one religion which shows us how we can best play our part in his play, the subtlest laws and the noblest rules. It is the one religion which does not separate life from the divine, which knows that immortality has utterly removed from us the reality of death.
We have omitted part of our service this morning, as you can see by the bulletin, in order that we may give Sri Purani more time to speak. And that's the reason why Sri Purani has spoken to this moment. So everything's perfectly in order. And I know you'd like to hear him go on. I would. I'd like to say right here that he is going on, and that is in a continuation of a seminar in Sedona under the direction of Mrs. Lois Duncan, who is the head of the Cultural Integration Fellowship branch in Sedona. She is here in our service today. It's because of her cooperation and assistance that we have had this wonderful privilege and have shared this great experience. Now, as the ushers come forward, we're going to let you express your feeling and your appreciation for a church such as this, as Sri Purani was speaking of, a non-creedal congregation. So we bless this offering